On today's program, Kim has some plants for poorly drained soils. David Hillock revisits the Oklahoma-proven Kentucky coffee tree. We have water lilies for night owls. Extension wildlife specialist Dwayne Elmore uses netting to protect wood siding from woodpeckers. Kim harvests fennel seed. Barbara Brown prepares a kale salad. And we have a selection of a native grass that's bound to turn a few heads. Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance is provided by TLC, Oklahoma's leading garden center, Southwood Landscape and Nursery, Tulsa's source for great gardens, and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing.
We recently looked at ways to improve soil health and drainage. Additions of organic matter address many of the problems we face in soils, but sometimes we find a problem area, and this garden is a good example of that. When we take a look at the soil, the upper layers have been improved through years of organic matter additions and compost, mulch, and they're actually in fairly good shape, a nice loose loam. But when we dig farther in, we see we have these clay soils, and our clay is very compacted and it's also poorly drained, which means these soils tend to stay wet when other areas of the garden dry out. And this is a problem because roots need oxygen for the plants to grow, so a lot of plants can't tolerate that compacted wet soil. So what are we to do about this? Our options are fairly limited. We could excavate, if this were a brand new garden, we might excavate all of the soil out to a depth of 18 to 24 inches and bring in a looser soil. But in an established garden with trees and shrubs, that's really not an option. Plus, I always find it easier to work with what you have. That's true if you're working with shady conditions or wet conditions or dry conditions. So here, to work in a wet site, we can do a couple of things. One is to control the irrigation, make sure we're not overwatering. That's both here, but also in the areas that drain to this garden. So we need to control irrigation in the larger area. And most importantly is to select plant material that can tolerate these conditions. This deciduous holly, or Ilex decidua, is a good example of a tree that works well in clay soils. Other trees for these challenging sites include the red buckeye, cypresses such as the bald cypress or pond cypress, river birch, and also the black gum. Beneath the holly, we have an abelia growing. This is Ruby Anniversary. It's an Abelia grandiflora cultivar, and this plant does very well in clay soils. Other shrubs that you might consider include chokeberry, buttonbush, summersweet, and wax myrtles. Many of our ornamental grasses don't tolerate clay soils or a lot of water, but we do have a few we can work with, including this switchgrass. Some other grasses that work well in the shade would be the inland sea oats or chasmanthium. And for sunny sites, we could work with feather reed grass or prairie dropseed. And then, of course, not quite grasses, but grass-like plants, including the sedges and rushes. You can find long lists of perennial plants that will tolerate clay soils, like this ironweed here. Some other great choices include bee balm, milkweed, yarrow, and New England aster. So remember, if you have clay soils, it's better to work with those soils by selecting the appropriate plant material, in addition to doing what you can to improve drainage and organic matter.
Today we wanted to highlight a wonderful shade tree that can be grown in Oklahoma, and it actually is native from Oklahoma to the East Coast. It's not widely grown, unfortunately, but it is a beautiful tree, and it was one of our Oklahoma Proven selections several years ago. This is the Kentucky coffee tree, Gymnocladus dioicus. Gymno means naked, and cladus means branch, so it means it has naked branches. And if you look up into the canopy of the tree, you'll see it has a lot of large coarse branches and very little smaller twigs, thus giving it a very open growth habit, which actually is kind of nice. In the summertime, it provides wonderful shade to help cool your house. And then in the wintertime, when all the leaves fall, it has this very open, coarse texture to it to allow the low winter sun to come in and warm the house. So it makes a great, what we call an energy conservation tree. The word dioicus in the botanical name it refers to the dioecious nature of the tree, which means it has male and female trees. So the females will produce this bean pod, and actually I found one. This tree here that we're looking at is a male. There's no fruit on it, but we have some others on the property, and the females will produce this bean pod. And this is starting to mature now. As it matures, it'll turn a dark brown, almost black, to reddish brown color, and it will remain on the tree well through the winter months. And it's actually kind of cool on the females with these ornaments hanging up in the tree during the nice bright winter blue sky. So it looks like kind of like a Christmas tree. But if you don't want to mess with these fruits, then you definitely want to select a male tree. And you can do that by selecting a named variety when you go to the garden centers. There's several of them on the market. The most common one is called Espresso, great name for a Kentucky coffee tree. Then there's also J.D. McDaniel, also known as Prairie Titan, and Stately Manor, but Espresso seems to be probably the most popular in our area. These are male trees and won't produce the fruit, so you don't have to mess with the messiness of the tree. Now, Kentucky coffee trees prefer moist, humusy soils, but they're very tolerant of a wide range of soil conditions and will grow in alkaline soils, tolerate drought very well, and actually will tolerate short periods of flooding. Now, the one thing I really like about this tree, of course, is the texture and the look of it, especially during the summer months and the winter months. But if you look at this tree real carefully, this tree has what we call a bipinnately compound leaf. So this is actually all one leaf right here. We have a main stem or rachis, and then it branches off, and these are leaflets. So this is actually all one leaf. So when the tree drops its leaves, this whole leaf will fall to the ground. Be a little bit messy, but it's not too bad. It has a nice clear yellow fall color, so it looks nice in the fall time. And because of its nice open texture and that semi-shade that it produces on the ground, it's very easy to grow under, garden under as well. So the next time you're looking for a wonderful shade tree for the landscape, consider a Kentucky coffee tree.
Water gardens offer a relaxing atmosphere for unwinding at the end of a long day. The sounds of the water are soothing, and the flowers are fragrant and beautiful. Lilies, water lilies specifically, are the most common and popular type of water garden plant because of their large flowers and bright colors. Most water lilies bloom during the day, opening in the morning and closing late afternoon. For those of us who work during the day, we often miss their beauty. Luckily, there are night blooming water lilies as well. These open up late afternoon or early evening and will stay open until the following morning. These are perfect for those of us who are working. They come in a variety of colors, but I find the white is best for reflecting the moonlight. For the best of both worlds, consider planting both day blooming and night blooming water lilies. Joining us is Dwayne Elmore, a wildlife extension specialist, and obviously in your role you really encourage wildlife in the landscape, but as a homeowner you realize that sometimes there's problems and you have to deal with those.
Yeah, we have wildlife that cause issues in landscape a lot, but also sometimes on structures, especially wood structures.
And we visited this site previously to look at the woodpecker damage on the house. There's wood siding, and it's the flickers that are building nests, right?
Yeah, we have lots of species of woodpecker in Oklahoma, but northern flicker is the one that generally causes structure damage. And if it's confined to the eaves, the wood eaves of a home, it's a fairly easy fix, but when you have a solid wood siding home, it's a little more problematic.
And if we look at the fact sheet on this, there's several strategies to try to deter them. And you went through that. Tell me about it.
I did, yeah. Unfortunately, as a lot of the fact sheets say, most of these strategies are generally not effective, but we generally recommend to try them first and see if it gives you some resolution, because we start simple and work our way to more complex solutions. And so we went through lots of streamers and glass mirrors that spin in the wind, different things to try to repel the woodpeckers from being on the home. And those generally are not very effective, and unfortunately there's not good repellents such as a chemical that really works for birds. And as woodpeckers are migratory, they're protected, so you can't legally take them or kill them. So that doesn't leave the homeowner a lot of options other than trying to do some type of exclusion or change the type of siding.
Right. And one of the pieces you did when streamers didn't work is you tried to provide some alternative habitat. And this is a flicker box.
It is, and sometimes they'll use these, but not guaranteed. They generally need to be pretty high, 12 to 15 foot up or higher. The flickers generally like to be have their cavities high on a tree or in this case a house. The problem with flickers is they often like multiple cavities to pick from. So even when this was put on this home, the flickers just built more cavities around it.
So they used the box and then made more,
still did
more
damage.
Openings.
So that's, sometimes this might work for a homeowner, $50 or $60. You can try it, but I wouldn't count on it. It's not always going to help.
Okay. So with those cheaper alternatives failing, you went to what we would often do if we had an eave, we would put netting under it.
Right. On a small space, netting, exclusion netting is a great solution. When you get to a whole structure that's wood, it's really impractical to wrap the whole house in netting. However, on this particular house, there was really only one wall, and only the upper portion of that wall that was seeing woodpecker damage. So it was still an expensive fix, but it was feasible. I mean, it was within reach of doing. And this netting, being black, doesn't stand out very well, especially if it's in a shaded spot. So aesthetically, it doesn't necessarily look that bad. But it's still several $100s in material plus whatever labor you need
to put that up. And so far, it's been successful. Excluding them, it just creates this barrier between the home and prevents their activity.
Yeah, that's the key, is you got to get a few inches of space between the netting and the wood so that they can't reach it, and the netting needs to be tight enough so that wind won't blow it against. So we basically built a wire frame to hold the netting off the home, and about roughly 6 inches to get it off that wood. So it's a barrier just to keep the woodpeckers off, and you can completely seal it around the edges if you wish, but honestly they're not going to feel comfortable going up under. So even if there's a gap that they can get under, they're probably not going to do that.
Okay. And on this property there's a few alternative sites that hopefully next season the flickers might use. A nest box has been put up in a tree, and there's also a dead tree that's been left standing.
Right.
So potentially can be some habitat.
Yeah, hopefully they won't choose another portion of the home to do damage on. I sympathize with homeowners that deal with woodpecker damage. It's probably one of the more difficult things to deal with. This exclusion netting is the ultimate fix, but it is an expensive fix. So I think you really have to think about that when you're looking at home construction materials, if you're willing to tolerate some damage, because ultimately with a wood home you're going to see some damage down the road.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've allowed the seed on our fennel to develop so that we can harvest it for a spice. Both fennel and dill can be harvested for their foliage or for their seeds. If we're growing the plant for foliage, we actually want to cut off the flowers throughout the growing season to encourage continued production of leaves. Once we let the flowers develop, that's going to slow down leaf production. But late in the season, it's nice to let those flowers develop and go to seed so that we can collect either dill seed or, in this case, fennel seed. And we want to let the seeds mature on the plant as much as possible, but if you let them go too far, the seed heads will shatter. You can see here is a flower head where most of the seed has already fallen out because we've waited too long, but we'll still get plenty of seed. It's best to work over a bag, a paper bag, because you are going to drop some of the seed, and I am just simply coming in and cutting off the stems, and you can cut pretty low so that you get several seed heads all together. Now these are going to need to dry completely. Once they're dry, we can store them in a glass jar, but we want to make sure that there's no moisture left. If you put them in the jar and you see some condensation, then that means you haven't waited long enough. A nice way to dry these is to bundle them with a rubber band, and then we'll hang them up inside of a paper sack. And I can do that by wrapping it again with a rubber band to connect it. And I brought a stapler. I'm going to staple the top of my bag shut, and that way it'll keep out any dust. And just hang this in a warm, dry place until the seeds have completely dried. They'll shatter and fall into the bottom of the sack. And once they've dried about 2 weeks, you can go ahead and store them in an airtight container.
Today I'm going to talk about kale salad. Now, kale is one of the it vegetables of late. Everybody wants to have kale in some way or another, and a lot of times it's not prepared in the most nutritious way. So we're going to change it up a little bit and do something that's not going to add a lot of fat to it. It's not going to cook it a long time. In fact, it's not going to cook it at all. So I'm starting with the regular kale that you could grow in your garden. There are different varieties, and it really doesn't matter which one you have. Any one of them will work, anywhere from the curly one to the ornamental variety. First thing I did was wash it, and that's a critical step anytime you're working with greens. You want to make sure that you put it through at least 3 washes to make sure, because as you can see, it's all rough and curly and it grows close to the ground. It's really easy for sand and dirt to get in here, and that's our goal, to wash off the dirt, the sand, the dust, any bugs that might be accompanying it along the way. You're not really going to get much microbial difference between washed kale and not washed kale because the surface of a kale is so craggy, like it is on all produce, that and the microbes that we have on those things are so sticky that you really can't do much as far as washing them off. But we can get dirt and dust, and we understand that most of the produce that we get in is fairly clean anyway, so as far as not having a lot of microbial activity. So we've washed it through 3 washes. The next thing you want to do is get as much water off it as you can. Now this is important whether you're using it right away, if you're going to wait a little bit longer. So I'm going to put it in a salad spinner. But before I do that, I'm going to rip it off the thick part here. That's not going to work for the recipe that I'm working on today. You could, if you wanted to, save these and cook them. It's usable in a cooked form, just not so usable in the raw state, which is where we're going. So using 2 fingers, or you could use a knife and lay it down and cut it off here. It's just as easy to me just to use a couple of fingers and pull it off as you go. We'll get the rest of it in here. We're simply going to spin this through on a salad spinner to get as much water off it as possible, and then we'll go from there. One of the reasons that we did the spinning was keeping the water content down. Is also going to help reduce the amount of microbial activity we have. So So now we want to cut this into smaller pieces for our salad. So you just bundle it together part at a time and take something like a chef knife and cut it down in about 1.5 inch strips, and then kind of go the other way, just making sure that you got your fingers out of the way every time you make a slice through. And then those are going to go in our big salad bowl. So we need about 1/2 pound of kale, which is actually a lot. But even though we're not going to cook this is going to condense, because we're going to cold cook it, so to speak. So to this I'm going to add 1/4 cup of orange juice. You could use other types of juices as well. You could use apple juice, you could use lemon juice, whichever one you either have or you prefer the taste of. And I'm also going to add 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. Now I'm not going to add quite all of it at this point, because what I find is that it's better to be able to adjust and put more in than to take some out. The salt will help, however, as far as helping it move together and reduce in space, but it's primarily going to be the acid that's going to be working on it. So using your clean hands, what you're going to do is massage the kale, and this may take anywhere from a couple of minutes to up to 5 minutes. So you're not just tossing it, you're actually getting your hands in there and rubbing it. That's our goal here, is to actually break down some of the cells and let the acid in there so that it will continue to help the kale collapse. All right, you can see that the kale has collapsed quite a bit. It's also gotten much brighter green than it was before. If I can bring over some that we haven't worked on, you'll be able to tell the difference in color. This one is brighter green. Some of the cells have started to break down. And this is actually what happens when it cooks. So this is sort of a cold cooking technique. We're going to add to it 2 teaspoons of olive oil is what I'm using, but any kind of a nice tasting vegetable oil will do. And then 1 cup of dried fruit, and I'm using craisins because I like the color contrast. Raisins would also work, golden raisins, dried blueberries, whatever you happen to have. And then again, you're just going to toss these together at this point. You no longer need to massage the kale to make it feel better. We just want to toss these together. Now, the goal at this point, if you were making this at home, would be to cover it tightly, and you could probably transfer it to a smaller bowl also, since we have managed to condense it down, and then cover it tightly and let it sit for at least 30 minutes. Now, most salads, when they're dressed with an acid and an oil, you pretty much need to use them fairly quickly. This is one that will keep for you for quite a while. So even though it looks like it took a lot of effort to get the kale to this point, you can do it the day before, you can do it on the weekend, and it'll keep for a couple of days for you. So you do want to give it a little bit of time for the flavors to blend, however, and at that point you'd use something better than your hand to serve it, but since I've not gotten to the store it for a while stage, I'm going to go ahead and do this. Kale is highly nutritious. That's why it's one of the very popular vegetables at this time. It does have a little bit of bitterness to it, which sometimes children don't take to. However, we've added the orange juice. We've also added the dried cranberries. And when you have something bitter and you combine it with something sweet, it knocks back that bitterness. So this may be a way to get some people in your family, whether they're children or adults who haven't been particularly fond of kale or other dark greens, to give it a try. And I hope you will. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown, and this is Kale Salad.
Over the past decade or so, breeders have started to look to our native grasses as sources of ornamentals. Traditionally, most of our ornamental grasses are exotic grasses, primarily from Asia. One of the unexpected introductions is the use of blue grama, or Bouteloua gracilis, as an ornamental. Now, blue grama is one of the 2 primary grasses found in a shortgrass prairie alongside buffalo grass, which many of us know. And so it's been developed here into an attractive cultivar called Blonde Ambition. And I want to start at the base, looking at the foliage. It has a little blue tinge, light green color, and it'll reach a height of 18 to 24 inches. And then the flower heads are set atop those, and they can reach a height of up to about 2.5 feet or so. And the flowers are incredibly unique. Most grass flowers are rather upright, but blue grama holds its seed heads at angles, giving the plant really interesting architecture when it's in bloom. The flowers will start in mid-June, and they'll start as a green, kind of a chartreuse green color, and as the seeds mature they turn to this golden yellow color where it gets its name, Blonde Ambition. And then the seed heads will stay on the plant through fall, hang on into the winter months. And this variety is a little bit more robust than what you would see in its native cousin, and the seed heads are a bit larger. So if you go looking in a prairie right now, the shortgrass prairie, this plant is flowering, but it's going to be a bit lower. Blue grama is a sun-loving perennial. It also happens to be fairly cold tolerant. It will come back year after year for you. It performs best in a well-drained soil, but it does tolerate a wide variety of conditions. Although it's quite drought tolerant, it'll look more like an ornamental plant if it's given a little bit of irrigation. Certainly an exciting newer introduction in the world of ornamental grasses. This is Blonde Ambition Blue Grama. Here are some of the upcoming gardening activities around the state.
Next week, we'll be traveling to Oklahoma City for a sneak peek of a few of the gardens on this year's Oklahoma Horticulture Society's Garden Tour for Connoisseurs. Garden tours are a great way to gather ideas and gain inspiration, and we hope you enjoy next week's preview and then see these gardens in person in October. So join us next week for more TV you'll grow to love. For additional information, show notes, plant lists, recipes, and fact sheets, visit our website or contact your local Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service office. Segments from this episode, along with hundreds more from previous episodes, are available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Oklahoma Gardening. Be sure to join our Facebook group for information on upcoming episodes and gardening events, photos, and discussions of gardening topics. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens. This outdoor television studio is made possible with the help of our generous underwriters, TLC Garden Centers, Southwood Landscape and Nursery, and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, and the Oklahoma Horticultural Society.